Let's bring in Seth Kaplan, an aviation journalist, managing partner of Airline Weekly. He has traveled to Cairo and taught airline management courses for EgyptAir. Thanks so much for joining us, Seth. You have experience with this particular airline. You even brought along some photos for us that show the flight simulator and some of the things that you saw when you were working with them. You have a unique perspective. So what jumps out at you that we're missing?
Yeah, no, it's an airline. When you're on the ground there, you get every sense that it's a professionally managed airline, good training programs. I'm more on the commercial side, but I've taught pilots who are transitioning into management. And so you sort of contrast that against, as you've been noting in your coverage, sort of a mixed history here. An airline that had, EgyptAir Flight 990, of course, back in 1999. The airline disputed this, almost certainly murder-suicide by the pilot. The recent hijack, which thankfully, nobody was hurt during that. But yeah, when you're on the ground there, you certainly get the sense that this is an airline that's run according to international standards. Here, though, facing one of the toughest crises in what's been now a long series of incidents, not just for the airline, but for the country, if you include what happened in Sharm el-Sheikh last year at the Russian airline.
Yeah, I mean, you heard the report. They have found a debris site, but you make the point that, we shouldn't have any hope or false hope that it's going to be an easy search for what happened, right? I mean, we're still a very long way from knowing that.
Very much so. This is water, and not to oversimplify, but it's much more difficult when you're dealing with that, when you're dealing with potentially very deep water. Now, to be clear, this is not Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, in terms of a mystery where we're just, who knows, maybe never going to know exactly what happened. We're going to get to the bottom of this. But, for perspective, Air France Flight 447, that was one that crashed off the coast of Brazil back in 2009. One where, just like this, rather quickly, we knew more or less where it went down. In that case, I mean, it took 2 years to find the debris field at the bottom of the ocean, and then the black boxes. So, you can have a rather good handle on, more or less where the plane went down, have some good ideas about what might have happened, and yet have it take a very long time to really know. In
your expert opinion, I mean, where do you think the evidence is pointing right now? I understand it's very early times, and no one has claimed credit one way or the other. We have no idea whether it is a result of terror or not. But what do you think? What does your gut tell you?
Yeah, and anybody who claims to be doing anything more than, let's be honest, educated guessing at this point, isn't being forthright. But, I mean, look, it seems to have been an explosion, more likely than not an intentional one. Although, even there, I mean, with no group having yet claimed responsibility, I mean, my mind goes to an incident, actually exactly 20 years ago this month, ValueJet Flight 592, where you had, those oxygen canisters explode. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not saying that's the most likely explanation here. The big question, if in fact this was a bomb, an intentional explosion, is where was it loaded? Pan Am Flight 103, which exploded over Lockerbie, Scotland. In that case, you had a bomb that was loaded in Malta, transferred to Pan Am in Frankfurt, and then actually exploded after taking off from London. So here you're dealing with these questions about a plane that spent parts of its day in Eritrea, a company on a sort of a red flag list under the United Nations in terms of aviation safety, in Tunisia, in Egypt itself. And the answer to that question about where and how it got aboard is very important, because if somebody penetrated security at Paris Charles de Gaulle, I mean, there's not a lot of precedent for that. For an airliner taking off from a developed world airport like that and exploding with a bomb that was loaded there.
Yeah, I mean, you make a very good point that there are two different routes that you want to be looking at for failure. Was this a failure of airport security, or was it a failure, if it was in fact intentional, of intelligence systems, right?
Exactly. So because, when you think about plots that have succeeded and failed, just go back the past decade and a half, starting with 9/11, more often than not, it was at least as much a result of intelligence that succeeded or failed. I mean, even 9/11, for all that we understandably enough did in terms of beefing up airport security, if you think about that, Melissa, that wasn't really a security at the failure rather at the airport security checkpoint. I mean, those box cutters were legal on that day. That was a national intelligence failure. I mean, we had these guys who were interested in learning how to fly planes but not land them, and all kinds of other data points, and just agencies not talking to each other. Brussels, most recently, largely an intelligence failure, whereas on the other hand, there was that plot to blow up a bunch of planes flying out of London Heathrow about a decade ago, actually resulted in the liquids restrictions that endured to this day. In that case, intelligence worked. Those guys weren't caught at Heathrow. They were caught by intelligence operatives in the UK. So obviously, airport security is tantamount. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. Intelligence also has to work.
Seth Kaplan, thanks for joining us. Thanks for your insight. John.
Thank you, Melissa.